2001, Black Hawk Down is released, a film that forever changed the rules of the war movie game. Director Ridley Scott, already known for his epic films like Gladiator, tackled one of the most complex and tragic pages in modern military history: the real-life Battle of Mogadishu in 1993. This is not just a film about heroism. It is a brutal, chaotic, and painfully realistic immersion into the very hell of urban combat. Scott has abandoned Hollywood gloss in favor of an uncompromising, almost documentary authenticity. He has made the audience feel every bullet, every explosion, every drop of sweat and fear along with the soldiers on the ground. The film was a visual shocker, a technical breakthrough, and a hotly debated subject. But how did they do it? Black Hawk Down is not just what we see on screen. It's a story hidden behind the scenes, full of incredible technical decisions, acting dedication, and secrets that remained unknown for decades. It all started not with a script, but with words. With the words of investigative journalist Mark Bowden. In 1999, he published the book, The Fall of Black Hawk Down, A History of Modern Warfare. This was not just a military story. Bowden created something unprecedented. He spent months tracking down and interviewing the participants in that battle. He spoke not only to American Rangers and Night Stalker pilots, but also, most importantly, he found and interviewed Somali fighters who had participated in the battle. This allowed him to reconstruct the events from both sides of the barricades. The book became an absolute bestseller not because of its politics, but because of its style. It was an almost minute-by-minute, tense reconstruction of the chaos unfolding on the streets of Mogadishu. Bowden skillfully intertwined the fates of dozens of people, creating not just a report, but a real war drama. It was this book, this detailed and deeply human document, that became the foundation, the Bible, that producer Jerry Bruckheimer and director Ridley Scott laid as the basis for their film. They sought to transfer to the screen precisely this raw, unfiltered truth that Bowden so skillfully captured. It was absolutely impossible to shoot a film in the real Mogadishu in the late 1990s. The city remained one of the most dangerous places on the planet, torn apart by war. Any attempt to bring a Hollywood film crew there would have been suicidal. Therefore, Ridley Scott's team had to look for an alternative. They found it in Morocco, in the cities of Rabat and Sale. But it wasn't just shooting in similar locations. It was one of the largest set construction operations in modern cinema. Production designer Arthur Max was tasked with not just decorating the streets, he had to build Mogadishu from scratch. Within months, entire city blocks were transformed. They didn't just put up signs, they erected buildings and then methodically destroyed them, drilling thousands of bullet holes, creating RPG explosions, scattering debris and burned out cars. They recreated key points like the Bakara Market and the Ranger Base. The result was so convincing that the locals in Morocco were stunned by the realism. This wasn't Morocco anymore, it was a war zone. For the actors, this meant they weren't acting. They were in a real, breathing hell built by Ridley Scott. Today, looking at the cast of Black Hawk Down, it's hard to believe that it wasn't an all-star cast. But back in 2001, things were different. Yes, the film featured familiar faces like Josh Hartnett, Sam Shepard, and Ewan McGregor. But the real treasure of the film lay in the background. Ridley Scott had an incredible eye for talent, and this film became a real incubator for future megastars. You may not believe it, but for one of the most famous actors of our time, Tom Hardy, the role of Specialist Twombly was his film debut. Yes, the same, Mad Max, and Venom ran around Mogadishu in his first role. Just before he became Legolas in The Lord of the Rings, a young Orlando Bloom played Private Blackburn, the same guy who tragically falls out of a helicopter at the beginning of a mission. And Australian comedian Eric Bana, unknown outside his homeland, gave such a powerful performance as Sergeant Hoot that Hollywood immediately took notice. Add Nikolai Coster-Waldau, the future Jaime Lannister from Game of Thrones, and you have one of the most amazing casts ever assembled before they became world famous. Ridley Scott didn't just want realism, he wanted authenticity. He understood that actors couldn't just play elite Delta soldiers and rangers. They had to become them. So, before filming even began, the entire main cast was sent to a real military boot camp. This was no Hollywood imitation. The actors were trained by real veterans of the U.S. Special Operations Forces. Some of them, like former Delta operator Harry Humphreys, had even fought in the same battle in Mogadishu. They didn't give the actors any favors. For several weeks, the stars underwent an intensive course for a young fighter: urban tactics, weapon handling, medical care, and combat. They learned to hold their M16 and M4 like the pros do. They learned to reload blindly and move as a single unit. But most importantly, they learned to think like soldiers. The veterans shared not only technical skills, but also the psychological aspects of combat. What it feels like to be under fire, how adrenaline works, what it means to bond with your comrades. This training broke down the actors' self and built a real combat unit in its place. When they finally put on their uniforms on the set, they were no longer actors playing soldiers. They were soldiers ready for battle. The film crew wrapped up its grueling work in Morocco in the summer of 2001. The film entered post-production, preparing for its premiere. At that point, it was a story about a specific, tragic, but already past event in 1993, the failure of a humanitarian mission that turned into a bloody massacre. It was a look into the past, a lesson that America seemed to have learned. And then came the morning of September 11, 2001. The world changed in a matter of hours. When Black Hawk Down was released in early 2002, it was set in a very different global context. America was already at war in Afghanistan. The themes of war, terrorism, clashes with irregular forces, and the cost of soldiering suddenly became more than just history. They became daily news. The film, made before September 11th, was instantly seen as the first great film of the post-9/11 era. Its realism and depiction of urban combat suddenly took on a new, chilling significance. It was a case of history catching up with cinema, forever changing how audiences perceived every scene, every shot, and every casualty on screen. Despite its fierce commitment to technical detail and combat realism, Black Hawk Down was met with a barrage of criticism upon its release. And the criticism was not about what the film showed, but what it didn't show. The film has been accused of being completely one-sided. Ridley Scott brilliantly recreated the experience of the American soldier: chaos, fear, brotherhood. We see the battle through the eyes of the Rangers and the Delta, but we know almost nothing about the other side. Who are the Somalis? Why are they fighting? What are their motivations? In the film, Somali fighters and civilians are often seen as a single, faceless, hostile mass, rushing out from behind the horns to shoot. Their casualties, which are realistically estimated to have been in the hundreds, perhaps thousands, are barely noted in the film. Critics noted that by stripping away any political context and completely ignoring the Somali perspective, the film turned a complex conflict into a survival thriller. It was a perfect technical reconstruction of the battle, but not a full-fledged depiction of the war. Filming in Morocco wasn't just about working on sets. It was a daily test of endurance for the entire crew. The conditions were absolutely extreme. Imagine actors dressed in full combat gear, body armor, helmets, backpacks, weighing over 20 kilograms, forced to run, fall, and fight for hours. Now add to that the Moroccan heat. The temperature in the shade regularly reached 49 degrees Celsius. In the open sun, on the scorching streets of Mogadishu, it was even worse. It wasn't just heat, it was an oven. But that wasn't all. The filming process was regularly interrupted by unpredictable sandstorms. The wind kicked up tons of dust and sand into the air, clogging cameras, damaging equipment, and making breathing nearly impossible. But Ridley Scott saw this not as a hindrance, but as an advantage. The exhausting heat, the dirt, the sweat pouring off the actors, all of it was real. He didn't need to fake fatigue. The exhaustion we see on the faces of the soldiers in the film is not a game. It's real physical suffering, which the camera ruthlessly captured, adding that same trademark, brutal realism to every frame. Black Hawk Down. The film's title itself indicates the main mechanical heroes. Helicopters are not just transport, they are fortresses, they are lifebuoys, and, ultimately, they are tragic targets. In 2001, computer graphics could not yet convincingly recreate the complex physics, weight, and threat of these machines. Ridley Scott understood this. So he did the impossible. The U.S. Army provided real combat helicopters for the film. These were not just similar models, but the same UH-60, Black Hawk, Hawk, and MH-6, Little Birds, from the 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment. They are the elite of the elite, known as the Night Stalkers. But most importantly, the pilots were not Hollywood stuntmen, but actual military pilots. Some of them, like Keith Jones, were veterans of the real battle in Mogadishu. Imagine, a man who had survived that hell 8 years earlier was now recreating these maneuvers for the camera. They flew at breakneck speed, dangerously low, between buildings, raising clouds of dust. When the actors jumped into these helicopters, they could feel the real roar of the turbines and see the focused faces of the ace pilots. It was impossible to fake it. This was not a special effect. This was reality. To recreate the chaos of urban combat, you need more than just soldiers. You need a city itself, full of life, panic, and ordinary people caught in the middle of hell. A Hollywood extra set could never capture that. So Ridley Scott made a key decision that would define the film's visual authenticity. Instead of a few dozen professional actors, he brought in hundreds, and in some scenes over 1,000, of local Moroccans. These weren't people playing Somalis. These were real men, women, and children from Rabat and Sale, who were placed in the epicenter of the events. When real combat helicopters flew over their heads at breakneck speed, raising clouds of dust, their fear and surprise were genuine. When the explosions of pyrotechnics rang out in the streets, they ran and screamed for real. They brought to the frame not a game, but a real energy of life, chaos, and despair. These faces that we see in the market, in the streets, peering out of the windows, this is not a background. This is an integral part of the realism. It is this living, breathing mass of people that transform the Moroccan scenery into the real, dangerous Mogadishu. At the dawn of the 21st century, as Hollywood became increasingly fascinated with the possibilities of computer graphics, CGI, Ridley Scott took a step in the opposite direction. He understood that to recreate the chaos of Mogadishu, it was not a digital illusion that was needed, but the physical presence of danger. He categorically refused to use staged explosions. Every RPG shot hitting a wall, every helicopter exploding, every grenade exploding on the street, all of this was real, carefully planned work by pyrotechnicians. This decision was key not only for the picture, but also for the acting. When something really explodes next to you, you don't have to act shocked. You feel it. The actors physically felt the shock waves. Debris and plaster were falling on them. They instinctively ducked from the roar of a real explosion, not an added one in the editing. This hands-on approach meant that the dangers on set were real. Every take was a risk. But it was what allowed Scott to capture on film not the imitation of combat, but its raw, uncontrolled, deafening essence. Black Hawk Down doesn't just show war, it makes you feel it. And a huge part of that is due to the film's unique visual style. Ridley Scott and his director of photography, Polish Sławomir Idziak, faced a problem: how to film a battle taking place under the bright, scorching African sun while avoiding a pretty tourist picture? Idziak's solution was radical. He used a complex film processing process similar to bleach pass, bypass, and special filters. It literally washed out most of the colors from the frame, leaving a faded, almost monochrome palette. The blue of the sky became a dirty gray, and the colors of skin and blood took on a sickly, intense hue. The contrast was cranked up to the max, killing shadows into deep blacks and making bright areas blinding. The film grain became coarse and noticeable. The result is not a clean, digital picture, but a rough, dirty, aggressive image. The viewer seems to see the world through a veil of sweat, dust, and fatigue. This visual style is not just decoration. It is a key element that turns the film into an oppressive, claustrophobic experience, immersing us in the subjective hell of the soldiers on the ground. We leave no one behind. That's the Ranger Credo, a fundamental tenet of the American military. In Black Hawk Down, it's not just a pompous line that someone says for drama. It's the plot engine. It's the reason the entire battle happened the way it did. Think about it. The original mission to capture Adid's henchmen was supposed to last 30 minutes. Why did it turn into an 18-hour hell? The answer is in this credo. As soon as the first Black Hawk, a Super 61, was shot down, the mission changed instantly. It was no longer about capture. It became about rescue. The entire convoy, already heading to the base, turned around and tried to fight its way to the crash site. When the second helicopter, a Super 64, went down, the situation became catastrophic. It is this principle. We don't leave until we get ours. That becomes the emotional core of the film. It explains the incredible heroism of Snaggy and Sugar, who volunteered to go down to protect the second helicopter. It explains why the soldiers fought with such desperate fury. They were not defending territory, but the bodies of their fallen comrades. It is not a slogan. It is the literal definition of their actions that night. One of Ridley Scott's biggest challenges was time. The actual Battle of Mogadishu lasted over 18 hours. It began in the daytime, but the biggest, most desperate part of it, the defense of the drop zones, the waiting for rescue, took place during the long dark night. How do you fit 18 hours of hell into a 2-hour film without losing pace? The answer lies in a brilliant editing trick. Ridley Scott and his editor Pietro Scalia made a radical decision. They abandoned the real chronology in favor of an emotional one. The film creates the illusion that the entire battle is one continuous, frantic day-long battle lasting only a few hours. They took the events that took place over 18 hours and compressed them, placing them in a relatively short period of time. The sound design plays a key role here. The continuous roar of gunfire, screams, and explosions does not allow the viewer to breathe. We do not have time to realize that the hours are passing. Yes, there is a night phase in the film, the famous Mogadishu Mile, but it is presented as a climax and finale, rather than the main, hours-long part of the battle that it actually was. They sacrificed documentary time precision to create an unbearable, continuous sense of claustrophobia and chaos, making the viewer feel the exhaustion of 18 hours in 2. The theatrical version of Black Hawk Down is a relentless, 2.5-hour emotional assault. The film throws you into the fray and doesn't let go until the end credits. But when the extended director's cut was released a few years later, audiences saw what Ridley Scott had deliberately cut. These weren't just extra combat scenes. These were quiet, somber moments of human vulnerability. Scenes where soldiers don't just fight heroically, but where they break down, where they cry, where they question orders and the morality of what's happening. For example, in one of the most powerful deleted scenes, Sergeant Eversman, played by Josh Hartnett, has a complete emotional breakdown, admitting that he can't be a leader when his men are dying. Why was it cut? It wasn't censorship. It was a conscious artistic choice by Scott and editor Pietro Scalia. They realized that these pauses for reflection and emotion, while adding depth to the characters, completely ruined the frenetic, relentless pace of the film. They killed the adrenaline. The theatrical version is pure, distilled chaos. The extended version is a deeper, but also darker and less tense drama. To achieve the same chaos that the soldiers felt, Ridley Scott and cinematographer Slavomir Idziak abandoned traditional, fluid cinematography. The camera in Black Hawk Down is not just an observer. It is a full participant in the battle. The film crew worked in incredibly dangerous conditions, literally in the line of fire. Cameramen with handheld cameras ran shoulder to shoulder with the actors, fell with them, hid behind cover. When a real pyrotechnic explosion sounded, the camera instinctively shuddered from the shock wave, and this shock effect was left in the final editing. They weren't afraid of dirty shots, dust, smoke, debris flying into the lens. All this became part of the visual language of the film. Instead of long, beautiful panoramas, we get sharp, jerky camera movements that try to capture what is happening, often losing focus. This documentary, almost reporter-like style of shooting creates a powerful effect of presence. The viewer is not sitting safely in a chair, he finds himself in the middle of this labyrinth of streets, where danger awaits around every corner. The camera does not just show the battle, it participates in it. Black Hawk Down is more than just a backdrop. It's another layer of chaos, another character. The task facing composer Hans Zimmer was incredibly difficult. How to write music for a film already filled with gunshots, screams, and explosions? Any traditional heroic or pathetic soundtrack would have seemed false. So Zimmer did what he does best. He broke the rules. He created a unique hybrid sound that perfectly captured the essence of the conflict. On one hand, we hear his signature electronic textures, a hard, relentless percussion rhythm, and a piercing, mournful electric guitar. It's the sound of the American war machine, technology, and steel. But on the other hand, Zimmer has delved deeply into African music. He has enlisted world-renowned vocalists like Baba Maal and used traditional Middle Eastern and African instruments. These voices are not just singing, they are crying, they are praying. They are the sound of Mogadishu itself. These two worlds, electronic and ethnic, do not simply exist side by side. They collide, struggle, intertwine, creating a completely unique, disturbing, and deeply emotional soundscape. There's a rule in Hollywood: expensive war movies are risky, especially if they're violent. R-rated movies with no clear victories, no romantic plot, and virtually no humor. Black Hawk Down was exactly that. With a budget of $90 million, a huge sum for 2001, it was a colossal financial gamble for the studio. The film was uncompromisingly violent, dark, and offered no easy answers or patriotic uplift to the viewer. Marketers faced a daunting task: how to sell a film that was essentially a 2.5-hour fight scene that ended tragically to a mass audience. The campaign focused on authenticity, on honoring real soldiers, and on Ridley Scott's technical mastery. And the risk paid off. The film was released in January 2002, after the events of September 11, and found a response from audiences who were looking for something more realistic than entertainment. Black Hawk Down not only paid for its budget, but also became a major box office hit, grossing over $170 million worldwide. It proved to Hollywood that audiences were ready for a complex, mature, and honest war movie. The physical exhaustion from the heat and the weight of the equipment was one thing, but the psychological strain was something else entirely, much deeper. The actors weren't just playing war, they were living in a simulation of it for weeks, 12 hours a day. Imagine a continuous, deafening roar of gunfire, real pyrotechnic explosions that shake the ground. You see your colleagues you just joked with fall, covered in realistic fake blood. You run through the streets, and every building is firing at you. Many actors later admitted that the line between acting and reality began to blur dangerously. Their nervous systems were on constant alert. They weren't playing the adrenaline rush. Their bodies were really experiencing it. They returned to the hotel after a day of shooting not just tired, but emotionally devastated, nervous. This experience left a deep mark. And that genuine horror, that existential fatigue that we see in their eyes at the end of the film, is largely not an acting performance, but the real emotional state of people who have just gone through a simulation of hell. To achieve maximum authenticity, Ridley Scott went beyond just military consultants training the actors for the shoot. He invited real-life veterans, including those who fought in the Battle of Mogadishu, to be on set every day. Their role was invaluable. They weren't just sitting behind monitors, they were in the thick of things. They corrected the smallest details that only a professional soldier would notice. How the actor holds his weapon while running, how he peeks around a corner, how he reloads the magazine, which is the slang used in radio conversations. But that wasn't all. Several veterans of the 160th Special Operations Regiment, the same Night Stalkers, who flew helicopters, not only performed stunts, but also appeared in the frame as full-fledged actors, playing themselves the crews of the Black Hawks. This presence of the real heroes of that battle created an incredible effect. Firstly, it forced the actors to give their all, because they were playing alongside people who had experienced it. And secondly, it ensured that every movement, every action, every gesture was not just cinematic, but a real, proven real battle. When the film finally ends, after the grueling Mogadishu Mile, the screen fades and the credits roll. At this point, most viewers usually leave the room, but those who stay witness a quiet, but perhaps most important part of the film. This isn't just a standard crew list. This is a memorial. Ridley Scott used the end credits to pay tribute. Instead of one brief dedication, a full list appears on the screen. These are the names of all 18 American soldiers who died in the Battle of October 3rd and 4th, 1993. This conscious decision transforms the film from a simple action entertainer into an act of remembrance. It is a hidden tribute that forces the viewer, who has just been stunned by the chaos of the battle, to stop and realize the real, tragic cost of the events they have just witnessed. It is a final, powerful chord that finally anchors the film in reality and honors those who did not return home. The sound in Black Hawk Down isn't just a soundtrack, it's a weapon. The sound team, led by Michael Minkler, did something revolutionary. They understood that in real combat, a soldier rarely hears everything clearly. He's disoriented. Instead of following the Hollywood rule of sound purity, where every line of dialogue and every shot is perfectly balanced, they created what might be called a wall of noise. They took hundreds of audio tracks, the roar of helicopters recorded from the real Black Hawk Down, the click of thousands of shells hitting concrete, the screams of actors, radio chatter, explosions, and mixed them into a dense, chaotic cacophony. The gunfire often drowns out the dialogue. The roar of the turbines forces you to physically tense up. The team created a soundscape so realistic that hearing becomes another battlefield. This approach, using sound not as accompaniment, but as an element of immersion and disorientation, forever changed the sound design of war films. It set a new standard of realism that films like Saving Private Ryan and Inception would later emulate. When it came to the Oscars in 2002, Black Hawk Down found itself in a difficult position. The film was a technical masterpiece, but its political ambiguity and brutality turned many Academy voters away from major awards, like Best Picture or Best Director, even though Ridley Scott did receive a nomination. However, even those who criticized the film for its content could not deny its impeccable technical execution. It was pure, distilled craftsmanship. As a result, the film won 2 absolutely deserved victories. The first was for Best Editing. Pietro Scalia received the statuette for his titanic work of gluing 18 hours of chaos into a tense 2-hour story. The second was for Best Sound. It was a recognition of that revolutionary approach, that wall of noise that forever changed the way war should sound on film. These 2 awards confirmed what everyone already knew, regardless of your ideological stance. Black Hawk Down was, and remains, one of the most flawlessly made films in history. Before Black Hawk Down, most Hollywood war movies fell into one of 2 camps, either heroic World War II epics or somber reflections on Vietnam. But Ridley Scott's film, released in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, created a completely new template. It became the standard for 21st century war cinema. Its impact was enormous. First, it was the aesthetics of brutal realism, a handheld, chaotic camera, faded colors, and emphasis on dust, sweat, and blood. Suddenly, beautifully filmed battle scenes began to look fake. Second, it was the focus on the soldier, not on politics. The film showed war not as a strategy of generals, but as a claustrophobic experience of survival, here and now, through the eyes of an ordinary soldier. And most importantly, it's morally ambiguous. It was a film without a clear victory, a film about how bravery can coexist with disaster. This approach, disoriented, intense, subjective, and devoid of patriotic brilliance, has become the basis for almost every major film about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that has followed, from Stormtrooper to American Sniper. The story of Mogadishu did not end in 2001. It continues to live and evolve. Ridley Scott's film was just the beginning, a powerful flash that drew the world's attention to this battle. And now, decades later, a new, profound look at those events is being prepared. Netflix documentary series called Surviving Black Hawk Down is currently in production. Black Hawk Down. Its goal is to tell the story through the voices of those who were actually there. This project promises something that a feature film could not: direct language from real veterans, many of whom are only now ready to share their memories. It promises previously unseen archival footage from the battle itself and access to recently declassified military documents. This will not be a reconstruction, but a testimony. Scott's film was a gateway into this story for millions of people. It raised questions. And now, all these years later, we have the opportunity to get more complete answers directly from the participants. It proves that the story continues to unfold, and that some missions never truly end.